Please comment where you are watching in the world. Please share your horror stories via our email or subreddit in the description. Thank you. I remember the first time I had matched with Alex. It was a quiet Friday evening, and I was scrolling through Tinder with a glass of red wine in hand, half distracted by a rerun of Parks and Recreation playing in the background I was watching. His profile stopped me mid-swipe. There was something energetic about him, clean-cut, warm brown eyes, a great smile and facial hair, win-win for me. His photos seemed authentic too. One with a dog, one hiking in what looked like Yosemite, and another where he was laughing with a group of friends. No shirtless gym selfies. No overly curated poses. I swiped right, and 12 minutes later we matched. The conversation started easily, more naturally than I was used to on these dating apps. Alex genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. He asked thoughtful questions, nothing too forward, and even gave me recommendations for new coffee shops to check out in the city. By the end of the evening, we had plans to meet that weekend. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of excitement about a date, the kind that makes you nervously check your outfit 3 times before leaving the house. We met at a cozy wine bar in the West Village. I spotted him immediately when he walked in, tall, confident, that easy smile lighting up his face. He looked even better in person. The date was, in a word, perfect. He listened when I spoke, asked me about my job, my family, what I loved most about living in New York. He made me laugh, so hard I nearly spilled my glass of Cabernet. He was charming, but not in an over-the-top kind of way, just real. He told me he worked in finance, though he quickly added that he wasn't one of those Wall Street types who lived for the grind. He valued his weekends, his time off, his hobbies. When the night ended, he walked me to my subway stop. As he leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was like stepping into a rom-com, where everything just clicks. For the next 2 weeks, Alex and I were inseparable, texting constantly, meeting for dinner and drinks whenever our schedules allowed, and even planning a weekend hike upstate. He was attentive and thoughtful, sending me photos of his golden retriever, Cooper, and asking for updates on how my day was going. He felt like the kind of guy I'd been waiting for, the kind who made me forget about all the weirdos and ghosters I'd encountered before. But then little things started to feel off. The first red flag came during one of our dates. We were at this charming Italian place in Brooklyn, sharing a bottle of wine and laughing about something ridiculous when his phone buzzed on the table. He had it flipped over, but the buzzing didn't stop. I noticed the way his jaw tensed as he glanced at it. "You can grab that if you need to," I said, trying to sound casual. He smiled a little too quickly. "No, it's fine. Just work stuff." I let it go, but it stuck with me. It wasn't just the buzzing. It was the way he seemed distracted. Like part of him wasn't fully there with me. Then there were the calls. He'd excuse himself during our dates to step outside, always with some vague excuse about work or family. One night, we were walking through Central Park after dinner, and I decided to ask him about it directly. "Is everything okay?" I said, trying to keep my tone light but concerned. He hesitated for just a second before answering. "Yeah, it's my sister. She's going through a rough time right now, and I've been helping her out." It sounded plausible, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. His voice was too smooth, too practiced. I tried to shake the feeling, convincing myself I was overthinking. After all, wasn't this what I wanted? A guy who was attentive, successful, kind? A guy who seemed genuinely interested in me? Everything came crashing down about a month after we started dating. We had plans to grab drinks on a Friday night, but Alex canceled at the last minute, claiming he had to stay late at work. Disappointed but understanding, I decided to stay in and scroll through Instagram to pass the time. That's when I saw it. A friend of a friend had posted a photo from earlier that evening. A group shot at some trendy rooftop bar in the city. I almost scrolled past it, but then I froze. There, in the background, was Alex. He was sitting at a table with a group of people, holding a glass of wine and laughing. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. Sitting next to him was a woman, leaning into him with a familiarity that felt intimate. I clicked on the account that had posted the photo, my heart pounding. It didn't take long to find more. The account belonged to a woman named Emily, and her feed was filled with photos of Alex. In every single one, they looked like a couple. I kept scrolling, my hands trembling. There were pictures of them on vacations, at family gatherings, even one of them celebrating what looked like their anniversary. I couldn't breathe. This didn't make sense. Alex wasn't just seeing someone else. He was in a full-blown relationship. The next day, I texted Alex and asked to meet. I didn't tell him what I'd found. I needed to hear it from him, to see if he'd admit the truth. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment, and as soon as he sat down, I could tell something was wrong. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his cup and avoiding eye contact. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Are you seeing someone else?" His face went pale. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, but then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Emily and we've been together for a long time, but things haven't been good for a while." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "So you're in a relationship? While dating me?" He nodded, looking genuinely ashamed. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't expect to meet someone like you." His words felt like a slap in the face. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out without saying another word. In the days that followed, I blocked Alex on every platform and deleted his number from my phone, but the betrayal stayed with me. I couldn't stop replaying our conversations, wondering how I'd missed the signs. A week later, I got a message from an unknown number. "I'm so sorry for everything. You didn't deserve this." I didn't respond. What was the point? No apology could undo what he'd done. 6 months ago, I started talking to this girl on an online dating site. Her name was Ashley. She seemed sweet. Our chats were good, better than good, really, really good. She seemed down to earth, funny in a quiet kind of way, and she didn't try too hard to impress me, which was refreshing. After a few weeks of chatting every night, swapping stories, and joking about how bad we both were at cooking, she suggested we soon meet up. Her idea? A movie date. Specifically, Resident Evil 3D. Now, if I had my way, I'd have gone for a beer at some dive bar, or maybe even sat down for coffee. Something low-key, where we could actually talk. But she was dead set on the movie. "I've been dying to see it," she said over text. So being the gentleman I am, I agreed. Turns out, she only lived a few blocks away from me, which I thought was kind of cool. I figured it would make the logistics easier, right? Wrong. When the day of our date rolled around, I pulled up to her house right on time. Normally, I would have gone up to the door, knocked like a normal person, but she'd asked me to text her when I was out front. She said something about not wanting to keep her parents awake. Fair enough, I thought. So I'm sitting there in my car, engine idling, waiting for her to come out. 5 minutes pass. Then 10. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if I'm being stood up, but just as I'm about to send another text, the front door opens. Ashley comes out, and so do 2 other people. I'm watching this unfold in slow motion, trying to process what I'm seeing. There's Ashley, looking cute in a casual sort of way, smiling nervously as she walks toward my car. But trailing behind her are 2 people who, well, let's just say they weren't what I was expecting. "This is my cousin Jessica and her boyfriend John," Ashley said as she climbed into the passenger seat. Her cousin was easily pushing 300 pounds, loud, and, to put it bluntly, ugly as sin. She had this raspy smoker's voice and hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in a week. Her boyfriend, John, wasn't much better. He looked like the walking embodiment of a scumbag Steve meme, complete with a backwards baseball cap and an oil-stained hoodie. "They're coming with us," Ashley said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Great. Just great. So now I'm driving to the theater with this odd trio in my car. Jessica and John are in the back seat, loudly discussing their favorite strains of weed and how much they love ripping doobies. I know this because the words doobie and stoned as hell came up at least a dozen times during the 15-minute ride. Ashley, meanwhile, was eerily quiet the whole way, staring out the window like she wasn't even part of the conversation. We get to the theater, and I'm already wishing I'd stayed home. But I figure, okay, maybe the movie will salvage this disaster of a night. Spoiler, it didn't. The previews start, and Jessica and John are practically drooling over the Saw 3D trailer, going on and on about how badass it looks. Then the actual movie begins, and 20 minutes in, Jessica starts complaining that the 3D is giving her a headache. She makes this huge scene, flailing her arms and breathing like she's about to pass out, and then proceeds to leave the theater. And come back, and leave again. This happens at least 5 times. She's stomping up and down the aisle, her heavy boots echoing through the theater, and every time she passes by, she lets out this loud, exaggerated sigh. I keep glancing over at Ashley, hoping she'll notice how mortified I am, but she just shrinks further into her seat, like she wishes she were anywhere else. When the movie finally ends, I'm ready to bolt. But of course, the chaos isn't over yet. As we step outside, Jessica and John plop down on a bench, light up a cigarette, and start dry humping each other in full view of everyone. I kid you not, she's grinding on him while calling him hubby and saying things like, "Oh, you're gonna get it later." Ashley looks apologetic, but she doesn't say a word. Fast forward 30 minutes, and I'm dropping them all off at Ashley's house. I mumble a quick goodnight, and as soon as they're out of the car, I'm peeling out of there like my life depends on it. Now, this should have been the end of the story. A bad date, a funny anecdote to tell my friends over a beer. But no. Halfway home, my phone rings. It's Ashley. "Hey," she says. "Do you want to come back and hang out for a bit?" Every fiber of my being is screaming, say no. Go home. Forget this ever happened. But for some stupid reason, maybe curiosity or boredom, I agree. I figure, hey, maybe this will make for an even better story one day. I turn around and head back to her house. As I walk in, I realize why she'd asked me to wait in the car earlier. The place is a disaster. I'm not talking about a little clutter or some dishes in the sink. This was full-on hoarder's level. There's trash everywhere, empty takeout containers, piles of newspapers, random junk stacked chest-high in every corner. The air smells like a mix of old food and wet carpet, and I have to actively stop myself from gagging. "Sorry about the mess," Ashley says sheepishly. "It's fine," I lie. Her cousin and John, of course, live in the basement, which explains a lot. I ask where the bathroom is because, after the giant soda I had at the theater, I'm about to burst. "Oh, it's down the hall," she says. I make my way to the bathroom, flick on the light, and immediately regret it. The toilet is... I don't even know how to describe it. There's piss and shit everywhere, on the seat, on the tank, even on the floor around it. It's like no one has cleaned it since the Clinton administration. I do my business as quickly as possible, flush with my foot, and use my elbows to open the door. No way am I touching anything in that house. When I get back to the living room, I sit down on the couch, which is somehow the cleanest thing in the house, and try to focus on the 2 cats lounging nearby. They're cute, at least, and I figure if I just pet them and zone out, I can survive this nightmare. Meanwhile, Jessica and John are in the corner, having the most revolting conversation I've ever overheard. "Oh, you're gonna be my hubby," Jessica coos, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Yeah, baby, I'm gonna F*** you so hard," John replies, grinning like an idiot. I glance at Ashley, hoping she's as grossed out as I am, but she just stares at the TV, pretending not to hear. After an hour of this, I've had enough. I tell Ashley I need to leave, making up some excuse about an early bank appointment. She walks me to the front door, and as I'm saying goodbye, something catches my eye. The garbage in the living room starts to move. At first, I think I'm imagining it, but then I see them, cats. At least 10 of them, all different colors and sizes, emerging from the piles of trash like some kind of feline apocalypse. I get out of there as fast as I can and don't look back. For 6 months, I don't hear from Ashley. I figure she got the hint, and honestly, I'm relieved. Then, out of nowhere, she messages me on MSN. "Hey, how've you been?" she writes. I debate whether to respond, but ultimately decide to be polite. "I'm good. How about you?" "I have some exciting news," she says. "Oh yeah? What's that?" "I'm getting married." I stare at the screen, not sure what to say. "Wow, congrats. Who's the lucky guy?" "John," she replies. I blink, my stomach sinking. "John, as in the guy we went to the movies with." "Yep." I went on a date a few weeks back with a woman I'd been chatting with on a dating app for a while. Her name was Laura from New York. At first, she seemed great, funny, smart, and attractive. We exchanged messages for a couple of weeks, and everything felt easy, playful, like we were hitting it off. By the time we decided to meet in person, I'd convinced myself this could actually go somewhere. I wanted to make a good impression, so I decided to go all out. I booked us gold-class movie tickets. You know, the fancy ones with the reclining chairs and waitstaff that bring you drinks during the movie. I figured it would be a nice way to show her I wasn't just another guy taking her to a chain restaurant or a dive bar. I even made dinner reservations beforehand at a trendy little restaurant I'd heard good things about. I was excited. Nervous, but excited. Dinner first, then the movie, that was the plan. I got to the restaurant early, wanting to make sure I wasn't the guy who kept her waiting. I even found a good parking spot right out front, which felt like a small victory in itself. I texted her to let her know I'd arrived and settled in to wait. And wait. She showed up 30 minutes late, storming into the restaurant like a hurricane. No apology, no explanation. Just anger. "I couldn't find a parking spot anywhere," she snapped. glaring at me like I'd personally conspired to fill every parking space within a mile radius. I blinked, caught off guard. Sorry to hear that," I said, trying to keep things light. "At least you made it." She rolled her eyes. "Barely." By this point, dinner was out of the question. The movie was starting soon, and neither of us had time to sit down and eat. "Are you hungry?" I asked, hoping maybe we could grab something quick to go. "No," she said flatly. "Okay," I said. "Neither am I. Let's just head to the theater, then." Apparently, this was also the wrong thing to say. As we walked to the car, she muttered something about how I should have insisted we get dinner. I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. She'd just told me she wasn't hungry, and neither was I. What was I supposed to do? Drag her into a restaurant and force-feed her? The car ride to the theater was mostly silent, aside from her giving me directions like I didn't already know where I was going. I tried to make conversation, asked her about her day, complimented her on her outfit, but everything I said seemed to annoy her. She barely looked at me, staring out the window like she wished she were anywhere else. When we got to the theater, I thought maybe a glass of wine would help loosen things up. I offered to buy her a drink, and she didn't hesitate to accept. I got her a rose and myself a beer, and for a brief moment, it seemed like things might turn around. She smiled, took a sip, and even made a joke about how fancy the theater was. But then, as if on cue, she started to complain. "You know," she said, swirling her wine in the glass, "it's kind of weird that you didn't insist on dinner. Most guys would've." I blinked. "I mean, neither of us were hungry, right?" She shrugged, giving me a look that made me feel like I'd just failed some kind of test I didn't know I was taking. A few minutes later, she turned to me again. "You should have just bought me another drink instead of asking me to buy a round." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. "Oh," I said awkwardly. "I just thought it'd be fair. But if you want another, I don't mind getting it." She rolled her eyes again. "It's fine." At this point, I was starting to question my life choices. The movie hadn't even started, and I was already mentally calculating how much this night was costing me. Between the gold class tickets, the drinks, and the gas, I was easily over $100 in the hole. We finally took our seats, and I figured at the very least, I'd get to enjoy the movie. Wrong again. She sat as far away from me as the seat would allow, arms crossed, eyes glued to the screen. No leaning in, no casual brush of her hand, nothing. I might as well have been sitting next to a stranger. When the movie ended, I asked her what she thought, trying to salvage the night with some light conversation. "It was awful," she said immediately. "I can't believe you picked that." I stared at her, stunned. "It's just a movie," I said, trying not to let my frustration show. "Yeah, but it was boring. You should have picked something better." At this point, I was done. Done trying, done caring, done pretending this was anything other than a complete disaster. But I wasn't raised to be rude, so I offered to drive her back to her car. The ride was silent, aside from her occasional sighs of annoyance. When we pulled into the parking lot, I could see her car parked near the back, an expensive-looking SUV that probably cost more than my annual salary. "Is this you?" I asked, trying to sound polite. She glanced at my car, a reliable if unremarkable sedan, and wrinkled her nose. "You should buy something better," she said. "This car's kind of basic." I gripped the steering wheel, my jaw tightening. "Oh," I said through clenched teeth. "I'll keep that in mind." The moment the car stopped, she had her door open and one foot on the ground. I could see she was about to bolt, and in a moment of desperation, maybe stupidity, I decided to go for broke. "Hey," I said, stopping her. "How about a kiss goodnight?" She froze, then turned to look at me like I'd just insulted her entire family. "You really think you're getting a kiss after all this?" she said, laughing in disbelief. "Not if you ask me like that." And with that, she was gone. I sat there in the car for a good 5 minutes, staring at the empty parking spot where her SUV had been. I wasn't even mad anymore. I was just stunned. I'd spent over $100, gone out of my way to make the night special. And for what? To be criticized, belittled, and laughed at? On the drive home, I replayed the night over and over in my head, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. Should I have insisted on dinner? Picked a better movie? Bought her another drink without asking? Or was this just one of those situations where no matter what I did, it wouldn't have been enough? By the time I got home, I'd made peace with it. Sometimes, no matter how much effort you put in, things just don't work out. People can look great on paper, or in a dating app profile, but that doesn't mean they're worth your time. I deleted her number that night. I spent a year of my life wrapped up in thoughts of this girl, Emily. She worked at a bar near my place, and I can't even tell you how many nights I'd casually stop by with friends, pretending I just needed a drink, but really, I was just hoping to see her in her glory. She was funny, cute, intelligent, and had this playful way of flirting that made it impossible for me not to fall for her. I wasn't exactly subtle about my feelings. Over the course of a year, I asked her out multiple times. But every time, she'd brush it off with something like, "Oh, I'm not looking for anything serious right now," or "Dating feels like too much pressure." And every time, I'd tell myself to let it go, to move on, but then she'd give me one of those smiles or make some flirty comment, and I'd be right back where I started, head over heels for someone who clearly wasn't interested in me the same way. Then one night, everything felt different. We had made plans to meet up after her shift, and even though it was late, well past midnight, I didn't care. I would have waited all night for her if I had to. We ended up at this little dive bar not far from her place, just the two of us. It was one of those nights where everything clicks. We were laughing, talking about everything and nothing, and for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to feel the same way about me. People kept coming up to us, saying things like, "You two make such a cute couple," or "How long have you been together?" She always laughed it off, but I couldn't help noticing the way she didn't correct them. When I walked her home that night, my heart was pounding. I didn't want the night to end, but I also didn't want to push my luck. So I said goodnight, gave her a quick hug, and texted her as soon as I got home. "Do you want to go on a date with me next week?" I spent the next few minutes staring at my phone, waiting for her to reply. When the little typing bubble finally popped up, I held my breath. Yes, smiley face. I couldn't believe it. After a year of chasing after her, she'd finally said yes. I felt this massive wave of relief, like everything I'd been hoping for was finally falling into place. I went to bed that night feeling like I was on top of the world. The day of the date, I was nervous but excited. I'd picked out a nice spot for dinner, somewhere casual but still special enough to make it clear that this wasn't just two friends hanging out. I spent way too long debating what to wear, pacing around my apartment, checking the time every 5 minutes. A few hours before we were supposed to meet, she texted me. "Hey, I'm so sorry, but I just got called into work. They're short-staffed, and I really need the money. Rain check." My heart sank, but I told myself it wasn't a big deal. She was a student, and I knew how important it was for her to pick up shifts whenever she could. I texted back, telling her I understood and that it was no problem. But I didn't want to let the whole day go to waste, so I suggested we meet up for a drink before her shift. She agreed, and I told myself that even if it wasn't the full date I'd planned, it was still something. We met at a little bar near her work, the kind of place where the music's not too loud and you can actually have a conversation. She looked great, as always, and for a moment, I forgot about how disappointed I'd been earlier. I was trying to keep things light, joking around like I always did, and at one point, I said something like, "So, how are you going to make this up to me?" She tilted her head, confused. "Make what up to you?" "The date," I said, grinning. "How are you going to make up for canceling on me?" Her face went blank. "What date?" I stared at her, sure I must have misheard. "The date we were supposed to go on tonight," I said slowly, pulling out my phone and showing her our text exchange. She leaned over, squinting at the screen, and then laughed. "Oh, I thought you just meant, like, grabbing drinks sometime. I didn't realize you meant an actual date." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd literally asked her, "Do you want to go on a date with me?" There was no way to misinterpret that, no way to twist it into something casual. I felt my stomach drop. All the excitement, all the hope I'd been carrying around for the past week, just evaporated. She must have noticed the change in my expression because she tried to laugh it off, saying something about how she didn't mean to hurt my feelings. But by that point, I was already shutting down. I barely said another word for the rest of the time we were there. When it was time for her to head to work, I walked her to the bar where she worked, said a quick goodbye, and left. I didn't text her that night, or the next day, or the day after that. I couldn't. Every time I thought about her, I felt this wave of anger and embarrassment wash over me. Over the next few weeks, I tried to move on. I deleted our messages, unfollowed her on social media, and did everything I could to avoid running into her. It wasn't easy. She worked at a bar I used to go to all the time, and we had a lot of mutual friends. But I knew I couldn't keep putting myself in situations where I'd have to see her. Then, a few months later, she found a new way to twist the knife. A friend of mine was out at the bar where she worked, and apparently, she'd struck up a conversation with him. At some point, she casually mentioned that she was dating someone, a guy she'd been seeing for 3 months. When my friend told me, I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. 3 months? That meant she'd started dating this guy not long after our supposed date. Maybe even before. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after stringing me along for a year, flirting with me, letting me believe there was a chance, she'd moved on like it was nothing. And the worst part, she didn't even have the decency to tell me herself. She sent her regards through my friend, like some kind of throwaway comment. I'd spent so much time thinking about her, hoping for her, bending over backward to be the kind of guy she'd want. And for what? To be treated like I was nothing more than a backup plan? I haven't spoken to her since. I don't think I ever will. Some people just aren't worth the energy. I went on a date with a guy I'd met online, and to be honest, I thought it was shaping up to be a pretty good one for a change. His name was Adam. He was nice, humorous, engaging, and just awkward enough to be endearing. From our chats leading up to the date, I knew he was really into Christ. Religion's not really my thing. I hover somewhere between atheist and agnostic, but he was respectful about it and didn't push anything, so I figured why not. It's rare enough to find someone who doesn't open with a weird pickup line or ghost you after 3 messages. I decided to give it a shot. We met at this little Italian place downtown for dinner. He showed up looking sharp, wearing a button-up shirt and clean jeans, and he complimented my long black skirt almost immediately. I remember thinking he was sweet, even if a little overly polite, lots of ma'ams and thank yous that felt like he was trying a bit too hard. But I appreciated the effort. The conversation flowed easily, and I was starting to think this guy might actually have potential. After dinner, he suggested we go to the lake to watch the sunset. It sounded romantic, and I was wearing comfortable enough shoes to make it work. Well, at least for a while. By the time we got there, I realized the walk down to the lake involved a bit of uneven terrain, so I took off my heels and carried them in one hand while we made our way down the dam. As we got closer to the water, the scenery was breathtaking. The lake was calm, the sky was streaked with oranges and pinks, and the air had that cool, crisp feeling that made it seem like everything was falling into place. Adam was smiling, clearly happy that I'd agreed to come here, and we found a log that was arched just enough to make a perfect little bench. It felt like the kind of scene you'd see in a rom-com, idyllic, peaceful, picturesque. Then, of course, I stepped on a broken glass bottle. At first, I didn't even realize what had happened. There was a sharp sting, and when I looked down, I saw a jagged piece of glass sticking out of the bottom of my foot. I didn't want to freak Adam out. He seemed like the kind of guy who might panic at the sight of blood. So I calmly reached down, pulled the shard out, and told him, "Oh, I think I cut myself." He looked concerned but not overly alarmed, probably because my long skirt hid how bad it actually was. "Do you want to go back?" he asked, his voice soft and genuinely caring. I shook my head. "No, it's fine. We're already here. Let's just watch the sunset." In hindsight, this was a terrible decision. But in the moment, I really didn't want to ruin the vibe of the evening. He'd gone out of his way to plan this, and I didn't want to seem overly dramatic. I have a pretty ridiculous pain tolerance, so I figured I could tough it out for a little while. We sat there for about 15 minutes, talking and laughing while the sun dipped below the horizon. I was doing my best to ignore the growing wetness in my shoe and the slight throbbing in my foot. Adam was telling me a story about his brothers and some childhood prank that had gone wrong, and I remember laughing so hard that I almost forgot about the pain. But when we stood up to leave, everything changed. The moment I took a step, I realized I was leaving a trail of bloody footprints behind me. I glanced back at the log where we'd been sitting and saw a dark, sticky stain that looked like something out of a crime scene. It hit me then just how much I'd been bleeding. Adam noticed too. His face went pale as he stared at the trail I was leaving in the dirt. "Oh my God," he said, his voice tight. "Are you okay?" I waved him off, trying to stay calm. "It's fine," I said, even though it clearly wasn't. "Let's just get back to the car." I don't know how I managed it, but I walked back up the dam barefoot, leaving a trail of bloody footprints the entire way. Adam kept glancing at me like he wasn't sure if he should offer to carry me or just run for help. By the time we got to the car, I could tell he was starting to panic. "Do you want me to take you to the hospital?" he asked, his voice shaky. I shook my head. "No, it's fine. Just drive me back to my house. My roommate can take me." But Adam wasn't having it. "I'm not letting you wait around for your roommate. I'll take you to the ER myself." At this point, I was in too much pain to argue, so I slid into the passenger seat and let him drive. When we got to the ER, the waiting room was packed. The nurse at the front desk handed me a vomit basin and told me to keep my foot elevated while they prepped a room for me. Adam and I sat there for over an hour, passing the time by swapping stories about childhood injuries. I told him about the time I'd tried to jump off the roof with a bedsheet as a makeshift parachute and ended up with a broken arm. He told me about the time his brother hit him in the face with a baseball bat during an ill-advised game of backyard cricket. It was surprisingly fun, despite the circumstances, and for a moment, I thought maybe this date wasn't a complete disaster after all. When they finally called me back, Adam insisted on coming with me. I could tell he was trying to be supportive, even though he looked like he might pass out at any moment. The doctor numbed up my foot and started flushing the wound with saline. I couldn't feel a thing, which I found fascinating. In my infinite wisdom, I decided to make a joke out of it. "Hey look," I said, wiggling my foot so the gaping wound moved like a puppet. Rawr. This was a terrible idea. As I moved my foot, blood started gushing out of the wound again, and Adam's face went from pale to ghostly white in an instant. He swayed on his feet, muttered something about being fine, and then promptly collapsed onto the floor. The nurse rushed over to help him while I sat there, torn between laughing and feeling terrible. Apparently, Adam had neglected to mention that he was hemophobic. He had a serious fear of blood, and my little joke had pushed him way past his limit. By the time he came to, I was stitched up and ready to go. He looked embarrassed, muttering apologies as we walked back to the car. I told him not to worry about it, but I could tell the entire experience had shaken him. He dropped me off at my house, said a quick goodnight, and drove away. I never heard from him again. OkCupid date in a major metropolitan area. The young woman was 25, college graduate, attractive in her photos, and apparently keen on getting together after a bit of correspondence. Super. We arranged to meet for sushi. She showed up, a good deal more portly and pimply than I had expected, with two of her friends, another couple, male and female, in tow. She explained, "Oh, they just wanted to come into the city with me." Within the first minute, the date was awkward and off-putting, but the friends quickly separated from us, and I figured things would at least progress pleasantly. As we walked toward the restaurant that we had agreed upon, she suggested going somewhere else. Fine, no big deal. We sat down, had our orders taken, and waited. Within 5 minutes, her two friends entered and took a nearby table. Bizarre, but whatever. Dinner conversation mostly consisted of her regurgitating marketing jargon, while attempting to regale me with tales about working at an Apple store. I'm a political consultant by trade, so I wasn't exactly enthralled by the delicate science of being a floor salesperson for MacBooks. We finished eating, and her friends joined us at our table. The female friend, who was absurdly more attractive and far less portly/pimply than my date, informed us that there was a shop she wanted to check out before leaving the city. I was invited to come along. It turns out to be a store that specialized in bondage and fetish material, particularly latex. For my part, I was wearing a Brooks Brothers button-up and a pair of khakis. After listening to the incredibly overweight female shopkeeper pontificate on the pleasures of constriction and sweating, my wholly unattractive date, with whom I had never discussed sex and in whom I had no sexual interest, inquired, "So, are you into role-playing?" At this point, I, like a rape victim, was thoroughly dissociated from the situation. I only managed to blurt out, "Do I look like I'm into role-playing?" She didn't say much after that, save for a strange aside in which she commented, "You don't look all that interested. The last guy I took here was so excited and was touching everything." Yup. Evidently the fetish store was a frequent early date destination. Eventually, I walked her and her friends back to her car and attempted to part gracefully with my traditional non-interested handshake. "Don't I get a hug?" So I awkwardly embraced the kinky little troll, careful not to let her acne-scarred cheeks come into contact with my face. We said our goodbyes, and that was that. Still kinda irked that I didn't get to see her friend try on a corset. There are moments in life when the unexpected happens, when seemingly simple choices lead to nights you'll never forget, for better or worse. This is one of those stories, and it all began outside a small shop, just an ordinary day that turned into something far stranger. I was standing outside the shop, taking a smoke break, casually chatting with a few people who had gathered there. It was one of those moments where none of us knew each other, but fell into easy conversation, the kind where laughter and shared jokes make you feel like old friends, even if it's just for 10 minutes. That's when I noticed her. She was gorgeous. Her laughter was infectious. Her eyes had a spark, a kind of playful curiosity, and she had this confident way of speaking that made you feel like she was completely at ease. I couldn't help but watch her as we all stood around talking. She was holding a cigarette in one hand, gesturing animatedly with the other, and every now and then, she'd glance at me in that way that makes you wonder if she knows you're looking. At some point, the group began to thin out. People headed off to wherever they needed to be, and soon it was just me, her, and a lingering conversation that felt like it could keep going forever. We started talking one-on-one, and it turned out we had a lot in common. She had a sharp wit and a way of talking that made me want to keep the conversation going. So before we parted ways, I worked up the courage to ask for her number. To my surprise and relief, she gave it to me. Over the next week or so, we texted back and forth. Just casual banter that starts to build familiarity. I decided to take a chance and asked if she'd like to go out sometime. She agreed, but her answer came with a caveat. Her work schedule was chaotic, and she wasn't sure when she'd have free time. I told her no problem, we'd figure it out. Life gets busy, I get it. That same evening, after we'd been texting for a while, I ended up falling asleep earlier than usual. It had been a long day, and I was out cold. When I woke up, it was to the sound of my phone buzzing loudly on the nightstand. Groggy and confused, I glanced at the screen. It was her calling me. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming, but when I answered, I heard her voice on the other end, soft but slightly slurred. She'd been drinking. "Hey," she said, her tone playful. "You should come over." I checked the time. It was past 11 p.m. My first thought was, who asks someone to come over this late unless they want something? I debated it for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me. I threw on some clothes, grabbed a pair of athletic shorts to sleep in just in case, and headed out the door. Her place was about 15 minutes away, and when I arrived, she greeted me at the door with a big smile, a little unsteady on her feet. "Come on in," she said, and I could hear music playing faintly in the background. Her roommate, another girl, was there too, and the two of them had clearly been drinking for most of the evening. The living room was littered with empty bottles and half-empty glasses, and there was a sort of chaotic energy to the place, the kind of vibe you expect when people have been letting loose for hours. I joined them, and for the next hour or so we all drank and talked. Her roommate was nice, but eventually, she excused herself and went back to her room, leaving just the two of us. We stayed in the living room a little longer, but I could tell she was starting to get tired. Her movements were slower, her eyelids heavy. After a while, she stood up, stretched, and said, "I'm gonna get ready for bed." That's when things took an unexpected turn. She walked over to her closet, opened it, and started pulling out some pajamas. Then, without hesitation or a second thought, she just stripped down, completely nude, right there in front of me. It wasn't like she was trying to be seductive or anything. It was so casual, like it didn't even occur to her that this might be a big deal to someone she'd only known for a week. I sat there, trying not to stare but also unable to look away, wondering what exactly I'd gotten myself into. She slipped into her pajamas and turned to me with a sleepy smile. "You can crash here if you want," she said, gesturing toward her bed. I nodded, grabbed the shorts I'd brought, and changed quickly while she wasn't looking. We climbed into bed, and for a moment, I thought maybe this was heading in the direction I'd assumed earlier. I tried to make a move, nothing too aggressive, just testing the waters, but she stopped me gently. "I just really want to sleep," she said, her voice soft and a little apologetic. I was confused, but I didn't push it. If sleep was all she wanted, then fine. Honestly, there's something kind of nice about just lying next to someone, sharing that quiet intimacy without any expectations. So I settled in, and we both tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. She tossed and turned for hours, shifting restlessly beside me. Every time I started to drift off, she'd move again, waking me up. After a while, I sat up and asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded but didn't say much. Instead, she sat up too, rubbing her head as if trying to shake off a headache. I thought maybe the alcohol was catching up to her, so I reached out and rubbed her back, trying to soothe her. Then, without warning, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and crawled onto the floor. What happened next felt like something out of a horror movie. She got onto her hands and knees and crawled to the middle of the room, where she sat back on her heels and started rocking back and forth. I watched, half concerned and half terrified, unsure of what to do. It was like she was in some kind of trance. Then, out of nowhere, she grabbed something off the floor, some random piece of clothing, and stuffed it between her legs. She stayed like that for another minute or two, completely still, before finally crawling back into bed as if nothing had happened. After that, she stopped tossing and turning. She fell asleep almost immediately, and the room was finally quiet. I lay awake for a long time, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Part of me wanted to wake her up and ask if she was okay, but I didn't. Instead, I eventually drifted off, the strange events of the night replaying in my mind. The next morning, we both woke up groggy but otherwise fine. As we got out of bed, I noticed something strange. My pants, which I'd left on the floor, were completely soaked. At first, I thought maybe one of the drinks from the night before had spilled on them, but then the memory of what had happened during the night came rushing back. That's when it hit me. She had used my pants during her strange midnight episode. She had peed on them. She must have noticed too because she glanced at the pants, then at me, her expression unreadable. I had no idea if she remembered what had happened or if she was just as confused as I was. Not wanting to embarrass her, or myself, I laughed it off, blaming it on one of the drinks we'd left sitting around. Her roommate joined in on the laughter, and we all joked about how wild the night had been. But deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about it. After breakfast, I said my goodbyes and left. As I walked home, I replayed the events of the night over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it all. What had I gotten myself into? Did she remember what had happened? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do now? No one will ever read this, and honestly, I'm fine with that. Maybe it's better if this story stays buried in the depths of the internet, unseen and unjudged, because this is, without a doubt, the worst date I've ever been on. Like by far. It all started when a friend of mine, someone I trusted, someone I thought had my best interests at heart, decided to set me up on a blind date. "He's my nephew," she said. "He's a great guy. You'll like him." I should have known better. Nephew or not, the words blind date should have been my cue to politely decline and stay home with a bottle of wine and a good book. But I didn't. I agreed. I let my curiosity, and maybe a tiny sliver of optimism, get the better of me. The first red flag appeared almost immediately. Before the date even started, he called me. That part was fine, but the reason for the call? Less fine. "Hey, so, my car got stolen recently," he said, his voice casual, like he was announcing that it had rained earlier. "You're gonna have to come pick me up." Now, I'm not a particularly judgmental person, but something about this rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was his tone, like this whole situation was an inconvenience for him, and I should be grateful he was giving me the opportunity to chauffeur him around. But whatever. I told myself to give him the benefit of the doubt. Cars get stolen. It happens. Maybe he was having a tough time, and who was I to judge? So I agreed to pick him up, already mentally recalibrating my expectations for the evening. When I got to his place, he came out wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and jeans that looked like they hadn't seen a washing machine in weeks. I didn't say anything about it, but I couldn't help noticing. Still, I smiled, trying to stay positive. "Where do you want to go?" I asked. "Oh, there's this great seafood place," he said. "It's 2 towns over. You're gonna love it." 2 towns over? That was a bit of a trek, but okay. Maybe the food would be worth it. I could handle a bit of a drive. I wasn't thrilled, but I went along with it because, once again, I was determined to give this guy a chance. As we were driving, I realized I needed to stop for gas. No big deal. I pulled into a station, got out, and started pumping. When I got back into the car, something felt off. I went to turn on the radio, and that's when I noticed it. Every single one of my preset radio stations had been changed. I stared at the screen, my brain momentarily short-circuiting. "What the?" I started, and then I glanced over at him. He was grinning, clearly amused. "Your music taste is a little funny, huh?" he said, laughing like he'd just pulled off the prank of the century. I didn't even know how to respond. Funny? Funny? He'd been in my car for all of 5 minutes, and he'd already decided that my music I loved, music that had soundtracked countless memories, wasn't good enough for him. And not only that, but he'd taken it upon himself to fix it. I should have turned the car around and dropped him off right then and there, but no. I gritted my teeth, reset one of the stations, and kept driving. I told myself that maybe he was just trying to be funny. Maybe he didn't realize how rude it was. Maybe I was overreacting. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. When we finally got to the restaurant, things didn't get any better. It was a nice place, way fancier than I'd expected. The kind of place where the waitstaff wear crisp white shirts and the prices on the menu make you do a double take. I figured this was his chance to redeem himself. Maybe he'd made a bad first impression, but now he'd show me the kind of person he really was. Maybe he'd be charming, funny, and attentive. Maybe this date could still be salvaged. Yeah. No. As soon as we sat down, he pulled out his phone and started scrolling. At first, I thought he was just checking something quickly, but no. He was full-on engaged in whatever was happening on that screen. He barely looked up, barely acknowledged me. When the waiter came over to take our order, he didn't even glance at the menu before saying, "I'll have the double lobster special." Double. Lobster. Special. Meanwhile, I was staring at my water glass, trying to figure out if it was possible to actually die of secondhand embarrassment. But the real kicker? The moment that made me want to crawl under the table and never come out. That came about halfway through the meal, when he answered a phone call. In the middle of our date. I sat there in stunned silence, picking at my food while he chatted away like he wasn't being the rudest person on the planet. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, I heard him say this. "Yeah, she's alright. I'd give her about a 6 out of 10. Haven't seen her from behind real good yet, though." I don't even know how to describe the feeling that washed over me in that moment. Anger? Humiliation? Disbelief? All of the above? I wanted to scream, but instead, I just sat there frozen, staring at my plate like it might hold the answers to all of life's questions. How had I ended up here? What cosmic forces had conspired to bring me to this point? When the bill came, I was already mentally preparing to leave and never speak to this guy again. But of course, he had one more surprise in store for me. "Oh man," he said, patting his pockets. "I forgot my wallet." I couldn't even see straight. I was so angry. I paid the bill because what choice did I have? And signed the credit card slip with a hand that was practically shaking. All I wanted was for this nightmare to be over. On the drive back, I was silent. I didn't trust myself to speak, because I knew that if I opened my mouth, I'd probably say something I'd regret. He, on the other hand, was completely unfazed. In fact, he seemed pretty pleased with himself. When we got close to his place, he asked if I could drop him off at a bar instead. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I figured it was the fastest way to get rid of him. When we pulled into the parking lot, he turned to me and said, "Come on in. It'll be fun." Fun. Fun. I didn't even want to look at him, let alone spend another second in his presence. But again, I didn't say anything. Instead, I pretended like I was going to park, then hung back in the car, waiting for him to go inside. I wasn't planning on following him in, but I also wasn't planning on what happened next. He came running back out of the bar, a Budweiser in his hand. Remember, this is the same guy who claimed he'd forgotten his wallet at dinner. So where exactly did this beer come from? He leaned into the car window, his expression urgent. "Get the fuck inside," he said. "There's a skank in there who just broke up with me, and I need to make out with someone in front of her, so she gets jealous." I wish I could say I had some brilliant clapback, some perfect way to put him in his place. But I didn't. I just stared at him, stunned into silence by the sheer audacity of it all. After a few seconds, he sighed, muttered something under his breath, and walked back inside. I took that as my cue to leave. When I got home, I deleted his number and vowed never to speak of this night again. But, as fate would have it, he wasn't done with me yet. A few months later, out of the blue, I got a Facebook friend request from him. I stared at the notification for a long time, debating whether to ignore it or accept it just so I could tell him off. In the end, I did neither. Instead, I deactivated my entire Facebook account. I figured it was easier to quit the platform altogether than to risk any further interaction with this guy. So there it is. My worst date, hands down. No competition. I still think about it sometimes, usually when I'm having a bad day and need a reminder that things could always be worse. At least I'm not sitting in a seafood restaurant, listening to some guy rate me on a scale of 1 to 10 while he orders double lobsters and forgets his wallet. At least I'm not driving someone to a bar so they can make their ex jealous. And to my friend, the one who set me up on this disaster of a date, I forgive you. But please, for the love of all that is good and holy, never, ever try to set me up again. So a friend of mine, one of those friends who you think has good intentions but actually might just secretly hate you, decides to set me up on a blind date. "Oh, you'll love him," she says. "He's my nephew. He's a great guy, super chill." Now, I should have known better. The words blind date alone should have sent me running for the hills. But for some reason, I figured, what's the worst that could happen? Let me just say, I was a fool. A naive, trusting fool. It all started with a phone call. He calls me, which, okay, fine, that's normal. But the reason for the call, that's where things start to go south. Hey, so my car got stolen, he says, as casually as if he were telling me the weather forecast. You're gonna have to pick me up. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm meeting someone for the very first time, I'm maybe trying to make a good impression. You know, not start things off by making them my unpaid Uber driver. But against my better judgment, I agree to pick him up. I tell myself, cars get stolen. It's not his fault. Maybe he's having a rough time. Spoiler alert, this was the beginning of me making way too many excuses for this guy. So I drive over to his place, and when he comes out, I'm not exactly blown away. He's wearing a wrinkled button-down that looks like it came out of someone's laundry pile, and jeans that might have been alive longer than I have. But hey, I'm not shallow. I'm here for the conversation, right? I ask him where he wants to go, and he suggests this fancy seafood place 2 towns over. 2 towns over, mind you. Not the cute little diner down the street, not the casual burger joint around the corner. No, we're talking a full-on seafood extravaganza, the kind of place where lobster is listed as market price, and you have to take out a small loan just to order an appetizer. But whatever, I'm trying to be optimistic. On the way there, I realize I need to stop for gas. I pull into a station, hop out, and start pumping. When I get back into the car, something feels off. I go to turn on the radio, and that's when I notice all of my presets. Every single one has been changed. I just kind of sit there for a second, staring at the screen, trying to process what I'm seeing. Oh yeah, he says, laughing. Your music taste is a little funny, huh? So I changed them for you. He changed my radio presets without asking, without even mentioning it, like I'm some kind of musical charity case in need of his intervention. At this point, I should have turned the car around and dropped him off back at his place, but no. I decided to soldier on, because apparently I have the self-respect of a wet paper towel. We finally get to the restaurant, and things somehow manage to get worse. As soon as we sit down, he pulls out his phone and starts scrolling. Not a quick glance, not a let me check this really fast, sorry about that. No, this man is full-on absorbed in whatever nonsense is happening on his screen. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there, staring at the menu, wondering if it's possible to eat my weight in shrimp cocktail just to get through the night. When the waiter comes over, he doesn't even look at the menu. I'll have the double lobster special, he says, like he's a Rockefeller and not someone whose car allegedly got stolen. I order something small, mostly because I'm too annoyed to enjoy food, and I figure I'll grab something on the way home after I drop this clown off. If only I'd known how much worse things were about to get. At some point during the meal, he gets a phone call, and instead of ignoring it, like any decent human being would do while on a date, he answers it. I'm sitting there, dumbfounded, while he chats away like I'm not even there. And then, just when I think it can't get any worse, he says this. Yeah, she's alright. I'd give her about a 6 out of 10. Haven't seen her from behind real good yet, though. I don't know if I've ever been so close to committing a crime. I wanted to flip the table, throw my drink in his face, and walk out, but instead, I just sat there frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. Was this real life? Was I being punked? Where were the cameras? The bill comes, and I'm already planning my escape when he hits me with, "Oh man, I forgot my wallet." Of course he did. Of course. Because why wouldn't he? At this point, I'm so angry, I can barely see straight. I pay the bill, because what else am I supposed to do? And sign the credit card slip with a hand that's visibly shaking. I'm not sure if it's from rage or humiliation, or some unholy combination of the two. On the drive back, I'm dead silent. I don't trust myself to speak, because I know that if I open my mouth, it's all going to come pouring out, and I'll say something that'll make the situation even worse. He, on the other hand, is completely unfazed. In fact, he has the audacity to ask me to drop him off at a bar instead of his house. It'll be fun, he says, like we're best friends about to go on some grand adventure. I drop him off at the bar, but before he goes inside, he turns to me and says, "You should come in. It'll be a good time." I decline, obviously, but instead of taking the hint, he leans in and says, "Come on, there's this skank in there who just broke up with me, and I need to make out with someone in front of her so she'll get jealous." I don't even have words at this point. I just stare at him, blinking, like he's speaking a language I don't understand. Eventually, he sighs, mutters something under his breath, and goes inside. I wait just long enough to make sure he's not coming back out, and then I floor it out of there like my life depends on it. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but no. A few months later, I get a friend request from him on Facebook. I stared at the notification for a good 5 minutes, debating whether to ignore it or accept it just so I could tell him off. In the end, I did neither. Instead, I deactivated my entire Facebook account. I figured it was easier to quit social media altogether than to risk any further interaction with this guy. So yeah, that's my worst date. The kind of experience that makes you question every decision you've ever made and every person who's ever told you, "Oh, you'll love him." To my friend who set this up, I'm still not sure if you were trying to sabotage my life or if you genuinely thought this would work out. But either way, I forgive you. Just never do this to me again. This story reminded me of one of the weirdest and most unsettling experiences I've ever had while dating. At the time, I was firmly in my bad decisions era, when my standards were lower than my self-esteem, and I thought saying no thanks to anyone who showed interest in me was somehow rude. Spoiler, it's not. But back then, I didn't know better, and this particular experience taught me a lot about trusting my gut, and about dodging machetes. So I met this guy. He seemed normal enough at first, at least by my already questionable standards. He wasn't charming per se, but he had that kind of scrappy bad boy vibe that made me think, oh, he's probably misunderstood. Let me just pause right here and say, ladies, if you ever find yourself describing a man as misunderstood, run. Anyway, we'd gone out a few times and things were fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. One night, he invited me over to his place, and for some reason, I said yes. Now, I should have known I was in for some nonsense the second I walked into his apartment. The first thing that hit me was the smell, this overwhelming mix of weed, stale takeout, and something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but could only describe as bad decisions. The second thing that hit me was his roommate, who he introduced as Cowboy. Now, Cowboy was at least 60 years old, had a wiry, unkempt beard, and looked like he'd stepped out of a low-budget western, where the main plot is that everyone's on drugs. Cowboy didn't say much at first. He just nodded at me, squinted like he was trying to figure out if he'd seen me before, and then went back to whatever he was doing, which, from what I could tell, was sitting on the couch sharpening a knife. I tried to act like this was totally normal because, again, bad decisions era. Meanwhile, the guy I was there to see, let's call him loser number 47 because that feels appropriate, was acting like none of this was weird. He offered me a drink, which I declined because I didn't trust anything that came out of that kitchen, and then he said, "Hey, let me show you something." Now, when a man says, "Let me show you something," in a tone that's equal parts excitement and secrecy, it's never good. But did I leave? No. Did I politely decline? Also no. I sat there like a fool and said, sure. He grabbed this enormous cardboard box from the corner of the room and plopped it down on the coffee table in front of us. When he opened it, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. The thing was packed, like bursting at the seams, with huge bags of weed. I don't mean a little stash for personal use. I mean distribution levels of weed. This was a DEA raid waiting to happen. As I sat there, trying to process what I was looking at, he started pulling out the bags and laying them across the table like he was showing off his prized collection. Then he looked at me and said, "All right, so here's how you sell it." Excuse me? He proceeded to give me a full tutorial on how to package, price, and distribute weed. I'm talking step-by-step instructions, complete with tips on maximizing profit margins and avoiding getting caught. It was like watching a very illegal episode of Shark Tank. Cowboy occasionally chimed in with his own expert advice, which mostly consisted of grunts and vague mutterings about the good old days. At one point, Cowboy actually got up, walked over to the window, and peered outside like he was on lookout, which did absolutely nothing to calm my nerves. I should have left right then and there. I should have stood up, said, "You know what, I just remembered I have to go wash my hair," and bolted. But no, I stayed, because apparently my survival instincts were taking a nap that day. Then came the knock at the door. It wasn't a polite knock either. It was loud and aggressive, the kind of knock that says, "I'm not here to sell you Girl Scout cookies." My heart stopped. Cowboy froze mid-grunt. Loser number 47, however, acted like this was totally normal. Without batting an eye, he got up, walked over to the wall, and grabbed a machete that was hanging there by a rope. Yes, a machete. Just casually hanging on the wall, like it was part of the decor. He opened the door with the machete in hand, blade first, like some kind of deranged pirate. I couldn't see who was on the other side, but I could hear them muttering, and it didn't sound friendly. They talked for a couple of minutes. Well, talked is a generous way to describe it. And then he shut the door, came back inside, and put the machete back on the wall like nothing had happened. At this point, I was ready to sprint out of there and never look back. I didn't even care if I left my purse behind. I was already mentally composing the 911 call I'd make once I got to safety. But before I could make my escape, loser number 47 turned to me and said, "Hey, you ever shoot a gun?" I just stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. "We should go out to the woods and shoot some shit," he said. "It's fun. You'll love it." Now, I don't know if it was the way he said it or the fact that Cowboy was still lurking in the corner sharpening his knife, but my brain immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. Shoot some shit? You mean me? I politely declined, muttering something about having an early day tomorrow, and stood up to leave. "Oh, come on," he said, flashing me a grin that I'm sure he thought was charming, but actually made me want to vomit. "You'll be safe with me." Safe. With the guy who just answered the door with a machete. I mumbled something about needing to get home, and practically ran out of there. I didn't even wait for him to walk me to my car. I just bolted, got in, locked the doors, and drove off like my life depended on it, which honestly it might have. The worst part? I didn't even break things off with him right away. I don't know if it was fear, stupidity, or some combination of both, but I kept seeing him for a little while longer. Every time I went over to his place, Cowboy was there, lurking in the background like some kind of chaotic spirit animal. Eventually, loser number 47 got arrested for, wait for it, drug possession with intent to distribute. Shocking, I know. I'd like to say I was surprised, but honestly, I was just relieved. At least now I had a solid excuse to never see him again. Looking back, I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe it was the fact that I'd been single for too long. Maybe it was the fact that I went to an all-women's college, and my ability to judge men was severely underdeveloped. Whatever the reason, I learned a valuable lesson that day. If a guy has a machete hanging on his wall and a roommate named Cowboy, run. Don't make excuses. Don't stick around to see how things play out. Just run. To this day, I can't walk past a machete or smell weed without thinking about that night. It's a reminder of just how far I've come, and just how low my standards used to be. Here's hoping Cowboy is doing alright, wherever he is. And as for loser number 47, well, I'm sure he's in prison now, probably trying to teach someone else how to maximize profits. Good riddance. I thought this date was going to be simple, normal, just an easy evening with a guy I'd been chatting with for a week. Tom and I matched on Hinge, and he seemed promising. He worked as a graphic designer out in Brooklyn, and I was living in a studio apartment in the East Village, so meeting somewhere central felt like a no-brainer. We agreed on dinner at L'Artusi in the West Village, a spot I'd been to once before and loved. The food was great, the vibe was cozy, and it wasn't too stuffy, perfect for a first date. I was cautiously optimistic. I mean, I wasn't ready to start planning a wedding or anything, but he seemed like a decent guy. Decent is rare these days. I spent a little extra time getting ready, curled my hair, picked out a black dress that was flirty but not trying too hard, and even traded my usual sneakers for a pair of low heels. For me, that's effort. I left early, because the last thing I wanted was to be one of those people rushing in all sweaty and apologizing for being late. Plus, L'Artusi fills up fast, even on a Thursday night, and I didn't want to risk losing our reservation. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted Tom standing outside. He was tall, a little lanky, wearing a button-up shirt and jeans. He looked like his photos, which was already a win. But then I noticed he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, holding an oversized Louis Vuitton purse, and looking like she was about to tell me all about her garden club, was an older woman. She had to be in her 50s, short, curly hair, floral blouse, sensible flats. My first thought was, oh, maybe that's his aunt or someone dropping something off. But she wasn't just passing by. She was standing next to him, smiling warmly, like she'd been waiting for me too. As I walked closer, I gave Tom a polite wave and glanced at the woman, still trying to make sense of the situation. And then, without a hint of awkwardness, Tom said, "Hey Emma, so glad you could make it. This is my mom, Carol." I swear to God, my brain short-circuited. His mom, on a first date? I stood there frozen for a second, trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Maybe he was pranking me, or testing me. Surely no one in their right mind would bring their mother to a first date at a trendy West Village restaurant. Right? I forced a smile, because what else was I supposed to do? "Oh, hi," I said, glancing between them, my voice betraying how utterly confused I was. Carol beamed at me and reached out to shake my hand. "It's so nice to meet you. Tom's told me so much about you. I almost said, funny he didn't mention you. But I bit my tongue. I was still hoping there was some kind of explanation for this. Maybe she was just here to say hi, and then leave. Maybe she happened to be in the neighborhood, and wanted to meet me for 5 minutes. Surely, she wasn't staying for the whole date. Spoiler, she was staying for the whole date. Tom held the door open, and the three of us walked inside. The hostess looked as confused as I felt when Tom said, "Table for 3. She led us to a corner table, and I sat down, still in disbelief that I was about to have dinner with my date's mom. As soon as we sat down, Carol launched into full interrogation mode. "So Emma, where are you from? What do you do? Do you like kids?" She didn't even glance at the menu. She was too busy grilling me like I was applying for a job as Tom's future wife. "I'm originally from Philly," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But I've been in New York for a few years now. I'm a copywriter at an ad agency in Midtown." "Oh, a career woman," Carol said, her voice dripping with something that wasn't quite disapproval, but wasn't exactly enthusiasm either. "That's interesting." "Interesting? What was that supposed to mean?" I laughed nervously and took a sip of water, already wishing it was wine. Tom, meanwhile, was just sitting there, smiling like this was the most normal thing in the world. He didn't step in to redirect the conversation or explain why his mom was here. He just let her keep going. "What agency do you work for?" Carol continued. "And how do you like it there? Do you think it's the kind of job you'll stick with long term, or are you thinking about something more flexible in the future?" I blinked at her, trying to process the not-so-subtle implication. I like it a lot. It's a great company." Carol nodded thoughtfully, like she was filing my answer away for later. "That's nice. But you'd be willing to put your career on hold for the right man, wouldn't you?" I almost choked on my water. "I mean, I'm pretty focused on my career right now," I said, laughing awkwardly. "But who knows what the future holds?" Carol frowned slightly, and I could feel her judging me. "Tom loves kids," she said, turning to him with a proud smile. "He's always wanted a big family. Haven't you, sweetheart?" Tom nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I've always thought 5 kids would be great. But, I'm flexible. 4 is fine too." 4? 5? Kids? I hadn't even ordered my pasta yet, and this man was out here planning our future like we were on an episode of The Bachelor. I glanced at Tom, hoping he'd realize how bizarre this all was, but he just kept smiling at me like he was waiting for me to agree. "Oh wow," I said, trying to sound polite but also firm. "That's ambitious." The waiter came over to take our drink orders, and I immediately ordered a glass of red wine. Tom ordered a beer, and Carol, because of course she did, ordered a Diet Coke. As soon as the waiter walked away, she turned her attention back to me. "So Emma," she said, leaning forward like she was about to ask me something deeply personal, "have you ever cheated in a relationship?" I froze, the question hitting me like a slap in the face. No," I said, completely taken aback. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, I just like to know these things," she said casually, as though this was a totally normal question to ask someone you'd just met. I glanced at Tom, waiting for him to step in and maybe, defend me. But no, he just shrugged and said, "Mum's just looking out for me." Looking out for him? Was this some kind of weird family ritual? Did Carol come on all his first dates to vet potential girlfriends? I wanted to ask, but I didn't trust myself to say it without sounding completely unhinged. The rest of the night was a blur of invasive questions and awkward silences. Carol wanted to know everything: my salary, my cooking skills, my thoughts on marriage. At one point, she even asked if I'd ever been in therapy. I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. By the time dessert rolled around, I was done. I made up an excuse about having an early morning meeting and asked for the check. Tom looked a little disappointed, but Carol looked smug, like she thought she'd successfully scared me off. Outside the restaurant, Tom tried to lean in for a kiss, but I dodged him with a polite smile. "This was lovely," I lied. "We should do it again sometime." Spoiler, we did not do it again. I blocked his number the second I got home. And Carol, wherever you are, I hope you're happy, because I am never dating your son again. I wasn't expecting fireworks or anything, but I was cautiously optimistic about my date with Brian. We'd been texting for about 2 weeks, and he seemed like one of the rare breed of guys who knew how to hold a conversation without making it weird. He wasn't sending me one-word replies or asking for pictures at 2 a.m., so the bar was low, but hey, he cleared it. He worked in finance in Manhattan. Typical, I know, but he seemed refreshingly laid back for someone in that world. A little sarcastic, funny, confident. I figured, why not? At the very least, I'd get a good drink out of it. We decided to meet at the Ready Rooftop Bar in the East Village. It's one of those places with twinkly lights, great views of the Manhattan skyline, and cocktails that cost way too much, but make you feel like you're in a rom-com. It was a Thursday night, perfect for something casual, but still with a little buzz in the air. I'd spent the day convincing myself this could actually be fun. I mean, he seemed normal enough anyway, and I was determined to give him a chance. When I arrived, Brian was already waiting at the bar. He looked like his photos, which immediately put me at ease. He was tall, with an easy smile and that effortlessly put-together look that screamed, "I work in Midtown, but pretend I don't care about it." He waved me over, and I have to admit, I felt a little thrill of excitement. First impressions? Solid. The first hour of the date was actually great. No, seriously, it was. We ordered drinks, an old-fashioned for him, a spicy margarita for me, and settled into one of the outdoor tables. He was funny, charming even, and we had one of those natural back and forths that didn't feel forced. We talked about everything from our favorite movies to the horrors of New York City landlords. He told me about growing up in Chicago and how he still missed deep dish pizza, and I told him about my childhood in Boston and how I could never live without Dunkin'. It was easy, comfortable. I started thinking, wow, maybe this could actually go somewhere. And then things took a turn. "So," Brian said, leaning back in his chair with a sly grin, "I've got a question for you." I smiled, sipping my drink. "Okay, what's up? How do you feel about threesomes?" I froze mid-sip, almost choking on my margarita. "A what?" "Threesomes," he repeated, like this was the most casual thing in the world. "Are you into them?" I stared at him, not sure if I was being pranked. "I mean, no, not really my thing." Brian raised his eyebrows, looking genuinely surprised. "Really? Huh, I kind of assumed you'd be into it." I blinked, trying to process what he'd just said. "Why would you assume that?" He shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "I don't know, you just seem open-minded. I figured you'd be down." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Well, I'm not," I said, my tone sharper now. "And honestly, it's kind of weird that you're bringing this up on a first date." That's when his whole demeanor shifted. The charm, the confidence, it all disappeared in an instant, replaced by something colder. "Wow, okay," he said, leaning forward. "No need to get all uptight about it. I just thought you were cooler than this." "Cooler? Cooler?" I stared at him, my stomach sinking. "Excuse me?" "I mean, come on," he said, his voice rising. "You're seriously telling me you've never even thought about it? Like, not even once?" Now I was getting angry. "No, Brian, I haven't. And even if I had, I sure as hell wouldn't discuss it on a first date." He rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms like a sulking teenager. "Whatever. You're just like all the other prudes. I thought you were different." I couldn't believe what was happening. Just an hour ago, this man had been making me laugh about how terrible New York bagels are compared to Chicago pizza. And now he was sitting here, sulking like a child because I didn't want to entertain his threesome fantasy. I stared at him for a moment, debating whether to just leave or give him a piece of my mind. But then he muttered something under his breath, something about how women these days are so boring. And that was it. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and looked him dead in the eye. "You know what, Brian? I don't think I'm the boring one here." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I walked out of that bar, my heels clicking against the rooftop floor, and didn't look back. As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed. A text from Brian. "Seriously? You're just gonna leave like that?" I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked his number and texted my best friend to let her know I'd survived, yet another entry in the dating horror story anthology that was my life. She replied with, "What happened? Spill now," and I spent the cab ride home typing out the entire story in all caps. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine, kicked off my heels, and deleted Hinge. Again, maybe I'd re-download it in a week, or maybe I'd finally listen to my mom and try meeting people at Whole Foods instead. Either way, one thing was certain. I wasn't wasting another second on Brian and his Midtown finance bro nonsense. And to anyone else out there wondering if it's okay to ask someone about threesomes on a first date, let me save you the trouble. It's not. I was actually kind of excited about this date. Jason seemed like the kind of guy I'd been hoping to meet. Easygoing, funny, and a little mysterious, but not in a red flag kind of way. We'd been chatting on Bumble for about 2 weeks, and he suggested a beach walk for our first date. "No pressure," he said. I liked that. No expensive dinners, no pretentious lounges, just a casual stroll along the shore. He lived in Huntington Beach, and I was in Long Beach, so we agreed to meet at Bolsa Chica State Beach. It felt like the perfect spot. I left my apartment feeling cautiously optimistic. I'd thrown on a sundress, tied my hair back in a loose ponytail, and even stopped for an iced coffee on the way to calm the first date jitters. The drive down the Pacific Coast Highway was gorgeous, with the sun setting over the ocean, and for once, I felt like I wasn't walking into a disaster. The vibes were good, or so I thought. When I pulled into the parking lot at Bolsa Chica, it was mostly empty. There were a few cars scattered here and there, but it was quiet, peaceful even. I checked my phone for a text from Jason. Nothing yet. I figured he might still be on his way, so I parked near the back and waited. A few minutes passed, and then my phone buzzed. "Hey, I'm here. Just parked in the lot." I looked around. The lot wasn't exactly packed, so it shouldn't have been hard to spot him. And then I saw it. A blacked-out Range Rover parked a few spaces away from me. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, but something about it made me uneasy. It was just sitting there, engine idling, like it was waiting for something, or someone. I texted back, "Which car are you in?" His reply came almost instantly. "Range Rover. Come on over." I stared at the message, my unease growing. Something about this felt off. I glanced at the Range Rover again, and that's when I noticed movement inside. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. It was Jason, or at least, it looked like him from what I could tell. But before I could fully process that, the passenger doors opened too, and two other guys stepped out. Both of them were wearing ski masks. My heart dropped. I froze, my brain scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. Why the hell were there two masked men with him? Was this some kind of joke? A prank? But there was nothing funny about the way they were standing there, motionless, staring in my direction. I didn't wait to find out what was going on. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and I was solidly in the flight category. I threw my car into reverse, backed out of the spot so fast I nearly hit a trash can, and sped out of the parking lot like my life depended on it. Which, for all I knew, it did. Jason texted me again as I was turning back onto the highway. "Where are you going?" I didn't reply. I couldn't reply. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them on the wheel. By the time I got home, I'd blocked his number and deleted Bumble. My best friend called me when I told her what happened, and she was just as freaked out as I was. "What the hell was that?" she asked. "Do you think they were going to rob you? Kidnap you?" I didn't know. I still don't know. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was something. But I wasn't about to stick around and find out. I haven't been back to Bolsa Chica since. And now, whenever I see a blacked-out Range Rover, my stomach twists into knots. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I wasn't. Either way, I've learned one thing for sure. When your gut tells you to get the hell out of somewhere, listen to it. I swear, I had no idea the universe could be this cruel. When I agreed to go on a date with Ryan, I never in my wildest dreams imagined it would involve bodily fluids. And not the good kind. But let me start at the beginning. Ryan and I had met on Coffee Meets Bagel, of all places, which, in hindsight, feels like the universe playing a sick joke. He was cute, short brown hair, a scruffy beard, and warm hazel eyes that made you feel like he'd really listen. His profile said he was a teacher in Chicago, originally from Milwaukee, and he loved hiking, trying new food spots, and trivia nights. He seemed normal, which was already a win in the dating trenches. After a week of texting, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner at the Purple Pig, a popular spot on Michigan Avenue known for its tapas. I'd been wanting to go there forever, so the foodie in me jumped at the chance. Plus, Ryan seemed sweet. I was actually looking forward to meeting him. The day of the date, I got a text from him. "Hey, I'm feeling a little under the weather, but I'd still love to meet if you're okay with it." Now looking back, I should have taken this as my cue to reschedule. But at the time I thought, he's making an effort. How bad could it be? So I told him I didn't mind, and that I'd see him there. Big mistake. I showed up at the Purple Pig a little early, and grabbed a seat at the bar while I waited for him. The place was buzzing, dim lighting, the smell of roasted pork belly wafting through the air, and the faint hum of conversation all around me. It was cozy, and I was starting to feel excited. But when Ryan walked in, I immediately knew something was off. He looked awful. His face was pale, his eyes were watery, and he was clutching a balled-up tissue like it was a lifeline. "Hey," he said, his voice thick and congested, as he gave me a weak smile. "Thanks for meeting me. Are you sure you're okay?" I asked, trying to sound polite, but also quietly horrified. He looked like he'd just crawled out of the plague pit. Yeah, he said, waving me off. It's just a little cold. I'll be fine. I wanted to bolt right then and there, but I didn't. Why? Because I'm too damn nice. Instead, I followed him to our table, mentally preparing myself to spend the next hour pretending not to notice the germs radiating off him like a biohazard warning sign. The first 10 minutes weren't too bad. We ordered drinks, just water for him, obviously, and started looking at the menu. But as he was explaining his favorite dishes, he let out the loudest sneeze I've ever heard in my life. It was sudden, violent, and completely uncontained. I froze, my eyes wide, as I watched the aftermath in slow motion. He didn't even bother to cover his mouth. Instead, he grabbed his tissue after the fact and wiped his nose, leaving a horrifying spray of God knows what all over the table. And unfortunately me. Bless you, I said weakly, trying to muster all the politeness I had left while resisting the urge to bathe in hand sanitizer. Oh, sorry about that, he mumbled, sniffling loudly. I've been sneezing all day. No shit, Ryan. I wanted to tell him this was a terrible idea. I wanted to say, hey, maybe next time, stay home and don't infect innocent people while they're trying to enjoy tapas. But instead, I just sat there, dabbing at my sleeve with a napkin and praying the waiter would show up soon to rescue me. When the food finally arrived, I thought, okay, maybe this will distract me. Maybe I can just focus on the food and get through this. And for a moment, it worked. The dishes were incredible. Charred broccoli with ricotta, crispy pig ears, and the most amazing bone marrow I'd ever tasted. I was starting to think, maybe this isn't so bad. But then it happened. Ryan let out another sneeze, this one bigger than the last, and this time, it landed directly in his food. And not just his food. Mine too. I stared at the plate of broccoli in front of me, now glistening with a fresh layer of Ryan's misery, and I swear I felt my soul leave my body. Oh my God, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Sorry, he said, grabbing his tissue again. I didn't mean to. It's fine, I said quickly, cutting him off. It was not fine, but I didn't trust myself to say anything else without completely losing it. I pushed my plate away, suddenly very aware of every germ in a 5-mile radius, and told him I wasn't hungry anymore. He looked genuinely apologetic, which made me feel bad for being so annoyed, but also, come on. Who shows up to a date when they're clearly patient zero in some apocalyptic flu outbreak? The rest of the night was a blur of sniffling, sneezing, and awkward small talk. I tried to focus on what he was saying, but all I could think about was how quickly I could get out of there without seeming rude. When the check finally came, I practically threw my credit card at the waiter just to speed things up. As we walked out of the restaurant, Ryan turned to me and said, "This was really fun. I'd love to do it again sometime." I stared at him, trying to decide if he was joking. "Yeah," I said weakly, because apparently I'm incapable of being honest in the moment. "We'll see." He leaned in for a hug, and I panicked. I turned my head at the last second, so instead of a hug, it turned into this weird, awkward shoulder bump that left both of us confused. But at least I avoided direct contact with his germ-infested hands. When I got home, I immediately threw my dress in the laundry, scrubbed my arms like I was prepping for surgery, and gargled with mouthwash just to be safe. I blocked Ryan's number before my hands had even dried. The next morning, I woke up with a sore throat. When I matched with Jake on Tinder, I thought he seemed decent. I know the bar for decent on Tinder is basically on the floor, but he genuinely seemed to clear it. He had a great smile, a steady job as a software engineer in Austin. He had this dry, sarcastic humor that made our conversations feel effortless, and after a week of texting back and forth, he asked me out for drinks. We decided to meet at the Roosevelt Room, this swanky cocktail bar in downtown Austin. It's one of those places with moody lighting, leather booths, and a menu so detailed it feels like you're reading a novel. I loved it there, and I was honestly excited to see if Jake's in-person vibe matched his online charm. Spoiler, it did. At first. When he walked in, I immediately noticed how much better he looked in person. Tall, broad shoulders, that kind of messy but on-purpose hair that guys somehow pull off without trying. He was wearing a black button-up that fit him perfectly, and when he smiled and said, "Hey, sorry I'm late, parking downtown is a nightmare," I felt a little spark of excitement. Finally, a guy who might actually be normal. The first hour of the date was great. We ordered fancy cocktails. I went for a French 75, and he got an old-fashioned, and the conversation just flowed. He told me about his job, how he'd moved to Austin from Denver a year ago, and how he was still adjusting to the Texas heat. I told him about my work as a marketing manager and how I'd been in Austin for about 3 years. We laughed about how everyone in the city seems to own a dog, and he joked that he couldn't walk into a coffee shop without tripping over a golden retriever. It was easy fun, and I started to think maybe I'd finally found someone worth a second date. And then Jake ordered another drink, and another, and another. Now, I'm not one to judge someone for enjoying a few drinks. I mean, we were at a cocktail bar after all, but it quickly became clear that Jake wasn't just enjoying himself. He was getting hammered. By the time he finished his third old-fashioned and moved on to tequila shots, his charming, laid-back demeanor started to unravel. He was slurring his words, laughing a little too loudly, and leaning closer to me in a way that felt less cute and more invasive. "Are you okay?" I asked cautiously as he downed another shot. Yeah, I'm fine," he said, waving me off. "I just needed this. It's been a long week." I didn't press him on that, but I probably should have. Instead, I just nodded and tried to steer the conversation back to something light. "So, what's your favorite thing about Austin so far?" I asked. He grinned, but it wasn't the same easy smile I'd seen earlier. This one was different, darker, like he was in on some secret I didn't want to know. "You really want to know?" Yeah," I said, immediately regretting it. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Okay, but you can't judge me." I laughed nervously. "I'll try not to." "So," he began, dragging out the word like it was some grand proclamation. "Back in Denver, I used to do some stuff. You know, nothing crazy or anything, but, yeah." I blinked. "Stuff? What kind of stuff?" He hesitated for a moment, then smirked and said, "Let's just say I wasn't always this clean-cut software engineer, okay?" My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Well, there was this one time," he said, his voice getting louder again, "where I may or may not have, I don't know, helped a buddy move some stolen cars across state lines." I stared at him, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Wait, what?" He laughed, like this was the funniest thing in the world. "Yeah, it was a long time ago. No big deal. I didn't even get caught." I froze, my brain trying to process what he'd just said. Was he joking? Was this some kind of weird flex? Or was he genuinely confessing to a felony in the middle of a crowded bar? Before I could respond, he kept going. "Oh, and there was this other time when I probably shouldn't tell you that one. You'd freak out." "No, please don't stop now," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. He grinned. "Okay, fine. So there was this guy who owed me money, right? And you know what? Never mind. Forget I said anything." I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. "Jake, are you serious right now?" "What?" "It's not like I killed anyone or anything," he said, shrugging like this was all no big deal. "It was just business. You know how it is." "No, Jake. I do not know how it is." At this point, I was torn between running for the exit and staying just long enough to see what other horrifying nuggets of information he might let slip. Against my better judgment, I stayed, mostly because I was too stunned to move, and also because I'd already ordered another French 75 and didn't want to waste it. Over the next 20 minutes, Jake proceeded to spill his entire criminal resume. There were stories about illegal poker games, sketchy deals with friends of friends, and even one incident where he'd accidentally set fire to someone's car. But it wasn't like on purpose or anything, he clarified, as if that made it better. By the time he got to the part about helping someone disappear for a while, I'd had enough. "Well," I said, standing up and reaching for my bag, "this has been enlightening, but I think I'm going to call it a night." "Ah, come on," he slurred, grabbing my wrist. "Don't go. I was just getting to the good stuff." I yanked my hand away, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, I think I've heard enough good stuff for one night. Thanks." He looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't understand why I wasn't totally charmed by his tales of arson and Grand Theft Auto. "You sure? We could go somewhere else. My place, maybe?" "Hard pass," I said, turning on my heel and walking out of the bar as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. When I got outside, I immediately called an Uber, my hands shaking as I typed in my address. As I waited for the car to arrive, my phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Had fun tonight. Let's do it again soon." I stared at the message, half expecting him to follow it up with, "P.S. Don't call the cops." Instead, I blocked his number and deleted Tinder for what felt like the 100th time. I'll be honest, I was kind of excited about this date at first. I'd matched with this guy, Liang, on Hinge, and he seemed like a breath of fresh air compared to the usual guys I approach of Hinge. He was originally from Guangzhou, China, and had moved to San Francisco a few years ago to work as a chef. A chef? I love food, and I'd never dated a chef before, so I was already picturing cute dates where he'd cook me amazing meals and teach me about all kinds of dishes I'd never tried before. We decided to meet for dinner at RNG Lounge, a popular Chinese seafood restaurant in San Francisco that I'd been dying to try. I figured it was the perfect setting for a first date, great food, lively atmosphere, and a chance to see what he was like in his element. I even joked with him over text that he'd have to approve my order, given that he was the expert. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already waiting for me out front. He looked just like his photos, short, slim, wearing a crisp button-up shirt and jeans. He had this warm, easygoing smile that instantly put me at ease. As we walked inside and got seated, I thought, okay, this is off to a great start. The first half hour of the date was amazing. Liang was funny, charming, and so passionate about food. He told me about his journey as a chef, how he grew up learning to cook with his grandmother, and how much he loved introducing people to traditional Chinese dishes. He even told me about some of the more unusual ingredients he'd worked with over the years, like jellyfish and sea cucumbers. I was fascinated. I mean, I'm no stranger to adventurous eating. I'd tried octopus and frog legs before, but this sounded next level. Then the conversation took a turn. "So," he said, leaning forward with a glint in his eye, "how adventurous are you when it comes to food?" I laughed. "Pretty adventurous, I think. I mean, I'll try almost anything once." He smiled, clearly pleased with that answer. "That's good. A lot of people are too afraid to try real food. They want safe, boring dishes, but they miss out on the best flavors. Right?" I said, nodding enthusiastically. "I feel like the best food is always the stuff that feels a little out of your comfort zone." "Exactly," he said. "Like live food." I paused, not sure if I'd heard him correctly. "Live food?" "Yes," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You know, like live shrimp, live octopus, live insects. The freshness makes all the difference." I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "Wait, you mean like eating them while they're still alive?" "Of course," he said, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "It's very common in China. You can taste the life in the food. It's so fresh, so pure." I didn't know what to say. I'd seen videos online of people eating live octopus in Korea, but I always assumed it was one of those extreme food challenges, not something people did casually. And insects? I'd heard of fried crickets and mealworms, but alive? My stomach churned at the thought. "Have you ever tried it?" he asked, clearly excited. No," I said, forcing a laugh. "I think the closest I've gotten is sushi." He chuckled. "Sushi is good, but it's not the same. You should try live shrimp sometime. They're still moving when you eat them. The texture is amazing." I smiled weakly, praying the waiter would show up and save me from this conversation. But Liang wasn't done. "One time," he continued, "I had live scorpions in Beijing. They were incredible. You just grab them by the tail so they don't sting you, and you pop them in your mouth. The crunch is so satisfying." I felt my jaw drop. "Wait, you've eaten live scorpions?" "Oh, many times," he said, waving it off like it was nothing. "And live frogs, too. They cut them up right in front of you, and you eat them while the heart is still beating. It's the freshest meat you can get." I stared at him, trying to keep my face neutral, but internally I was screaming. What the actual hell is happening right now? "I mean, that sounds intense," I said, choosing my words carefully. "It's not for everyone," he admitted, his tone almost condescending. "But once you try it, you'll never want to go back to cooked food." At that moment, the waiter arrived to take our order, and I practically threw myself into the menu to avoid making eye contact with him. I ordered something safe, a plate of salt and pepper prawns, and prayed he wouldn't judge me for not asking for them alive and flopping on the plate. Liang, on the other hand, ordered the live crab, which the waiter assured him would be extremely fresh. When the food arrived, I couldn't even focus on my own dish. I was too distracted watching Liang expertly dismantle the crab, which was still twitching slightly. He popped a piece into his mouth and closed his eyes, savoring it like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. "You have to try this," he said, holding out a piece of crab meat with his chopsticks. "Oh no, I'm good," I said quickly, waving him off. "This is plenty for me." "Are you sure?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "You said you were adventurous." "I am," I said, forcing a smile. "But maybe not that adventurous." He shrugged and went back to his meal, but I could tell he was disappointed. Meanwhile, I was sitting there wondering how I'd gone from imagining cute chef boyfriend vibes to contemplating whether I'd survive eating a live scorpion. By the time the check came, I knew there wasn't going to be a second date. Leon was sweet, but I couldn't get past the whole eating live animals thing. It wasn't just the idea of it, it was the way he talked about it, like it was some kind of moral superiority. Like anyone who didn't want to eat a live frog was weak or boring. I didn't say anything though. I just smiled, thanked him for dinner, and made a mental note to block his number as soon as I got home. When I finally got back to my apartment, I sat on the couch and texted my best friend about the whole ordeal. Her response was immediate: girl, run. And maybe become a vegetarian. I don't even know where to start with this one. It wasn't just the worst date I've ever been on. It was downright terrifying. So I matched with this guy, Matt, on OkCupid. He seemed interesting. Not in a bad way, just in a wow, you're really into niche stuff EY kind of way. His profile said he was a history teacher in Portland, originally from Seattle, and he had a thing for true crime documentaries. Which, okay, who doesn't? Making a Murderer basically united the entire country for a month. I figured he was just one of those artsy, intellectual types who like to read about weird historical events and watch Netflix specials about bank robbers and true crime. Our conversations were great and engaging. He had this dry wit that I really appreciated, and when he suggested meeting up for coffee at Guava Coffee Roasters, one of the more bougie spots in Portland, I thought, why not? A guy who drinks overpriced, single-origin coffee can't be that bad, right? Wrong. So wrong. When I got there, Matt was already sitting at a table with his coffee. He looked normal, tall, clean-cut, glasses that gave him a slightly nerdy vibe. I liked it. I grabbed a latte, sat down across from him, and for the first half hour, everything was fine. Great, even. We talked about work, our favorite books, and how Portland's weather was finally starting to clear up. He had this calm, almost soothing energy about him that made me feel comfortable, like I could really relax and enjoy the conversation. Then he brought up his hobby. So, he said, leaning forward with this little glint in his eye, you mentioned you like true crime, right? Yeah, I said, smiling. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm obsessed or anything, but I've definitely gone down the occasional rabbit hole. He grinned. Me too. Except, well, I guess I'm more than just a casual fan. Oh, I asked, taking a sip of my latte. How so? Well, he said, almost shyly, I have this project I've been working on. It's kind of a passion of mine. Now, I'm a curious person by nature. So when someone tells me they have a project, I lean in. What kind of project? He hesitated for a moment, then said, I study serial killers. Like in death. Their methods, their psychology, their patterns. I've been researching them for years. I froze, my latte halfway to my mouth. Oh, wow. That's intense. It is, he said, nodding enthusiastically. But it's so fascinating. Like, did you know that Ted Bundy used to fake injuries to lure his victims? Or that Ed Gein-inspired Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Silence of the Lambs? The way their minds work is just incredible. He said this with such excitement, like he was talking about his favorite sports team or a new video game he couldn't put down. And for a second, I thought, okay, maybe this is just his quirky thing. People are into weird stuff. It's not a deal breaker. But then he kept going, and going, and going. For the next 20 minutes, Matt gave me a TED talk on the greatest hits of serial killers throughout history. He talked about their body counts, their preferred methods, which ones had cool nicknames, his words, not mine, and even ranked them by how creative they were. I just sat there, nodding occasionally, trying to keep my face from showing the absolute horror I was feeling. I wanted to say something, anything, to change the subject, but he was so passionate about it, I didn't know how to interrupt. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. You know, he said, leaning back in his chair, I've always thought if I were going to do it, I'd probably go the Zodiac Killer route. You know, keep it mysterious. Make it a game. I stared at him, my heart racing. If you were going to do it, he laughed. Oh, I'm not saying I would. I'm just saying, hypothetically, if I ever decided to, I think that'd be the way to go. It's all about the challenge, you know? Outsmarting everyone. Leaving clues. Making people wonder. I forced a laugh, hoping I misheard him. Yeah, hypothetically. He smiled at me like we were sharing some kind of inside joke. Exactly. Hypothetically. At this point, I was fully creeped out, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe he was just trying to be funny in a really, really bad way. Maybe he didn't realize how insane he sounded. I figured I'd finish my latte, make an excuse to leave, and never see him again. But then he invited me back to his place. "I've got this collection of books and case files," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You'd love it. I've even got a map where I've been tracking unsolved cases. It's a work in progress, but it's pretty cool." My brain screamed, "Do not go to this man's house." That's really cool," I said, lying through my teeth. "But I actually have to get going soon. I've got an early morning tomorrow." His face fell. "Oh, come on. Just for a little bit. I'll show you my favorite case. It's about this guy who—" "I really can't," I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. "But thanks for the coffee. It was interesting." He looked disappointed but didn't argue, which was honestly a relief. I practically sprinted out of the cafe, my heart pounding as I made my way back to my car. I was halfway home when curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over, grabbed my phone, and Googled his name. Nothing came up. No social media, no LinkedIn, nothing. It was like he didn't exist. That's when I remembered something he'd said during our conversation. How he didn't like having an online presence because you never know who's watching. At the time, I thought it was just a quirky, paranoid thing to say. Now it felt like a giant red flag. When I got home, I blocked his number and deleted OkCupid. But the story doesn't end there. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Matt. Just wondering if you wanted to grab coffee again. I have some new stuff to show you." I deleted the text and blocked the number. Then I spent the rest of the night triple checking that all my doors and windows were locked. To this day, I still think about that date and wonder what might have happened if I'd gone back to his place. Would I have seen his collection? Would I have found out what was really on that map? Or would I have ended up as just another name on it? I knew I was in trouble the moment Ethan greeted me with a fist bump. Not a handshake, not a casual wave, but a full-on, overly enthusiastic fist bump that made me feel like I'd accidentally wandered into a frat house instead of our agreed-upon coffee shop. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning. Ethan and I had matched on Bumble, and at first, he seemed like a genuinely cool guy. His profile claimed he worked in tech innovation, which is vague but not unusual in Silicon Valley. His photos were a mix of outdoor adventures, classic hiking pic, a polished suit shot, a wedding maybe, and a goofy candid of him holding a dog. He seemed harmless, and his messages were witty enough to keep me interested. Plus, he was hot in that "I only own 3 shirts, and they're all Henleys" kind of way. We decided to grab coffee at Blue Bottle in Palo Alto. Neutral territory, casual, and low pressure. I was optimistic. I'd had a string of bad dates recently, so I was ready for something normal. Or so I thought. I arrived a little early, grabbed a small table near the window, and waited. Ethan walked in 5 minutes later, wearing sunglasses indoors, which should have been my first red flag. He spotted me, slid the sunglasses onto his head like we were in a rom-com, and gave me that fist bump. "Hey, you must be Sarah," he said, grinning like he'd just closed $1 million deal. "Yep, that's me," I said, forcing a smile and awkwardly bumping his fist. We ordered our drinks, an oat milk latte for me, a black coffee for him, and sat down. At first, the conversation was fine. We talked about work, where we grew up, the usual first date stuff. I told him about my job in marketing, and he said something vague about disrupting industries and decentralized systems. I didn't ask for details because, honestly, I didn't really care. I figured he was just another tech guy who liked to use buzzwords to sound important. But then, about 10 minutes in, he shifted gears. "So," he said, leaning forward with a gleam in his eye, "how much do you know about crypto?" I blinked. Not much, honestly. I mean, I've heard of Bitcoin and Ethereum, but that's about it." He nodded knowingly, like I'd just confessed to some deep personal flaw. "Yeah, most people don't get it yet. But that's the thing, this is the future. We're at the ground floor of a revolution." "Oh, cool," I said, trying to sound interested. "Are you involved in it?" "Involved?" he said, as if I'd just asked him if he breathed oxygen. "I live it." And that's when it began. For the next hour, yes, an entire hour, Ethan launched into a monologue about cryptocurrency, blockchain, and financial freedom. He talked about how traditional banks were corrupt and how the government was controlling us through fiat currency. He explained in excruciating detail how he'd turned his entire life savings into Bitcoin and how he was now building generational wealth. He even pulled out his phone to show me the Coinbase app, scrolling through graphs I didn't understand, while saying things like, "See this dip here? That's where I bought in. Genius move. Absolute genius." I tried to engage, I really did. I asked questions like, "So how does blockchain work? And what do you actually do with crypto? But every answer was a jargon-filled rant that left me more confused than before. At one point, he said something about NFTs, and I made the mistake of asking what they were. His eyes lit up like I'd just handed him a winning lottery ticket. Non-fungible tokens, he said, practically bouncing in his chair. They're the future of art, of ownership, of everything. I own 3 NFTs right now, actually. You want to see? Before I could answer, he pulled out his phone again and started showing me pixelated images of cartoon apes and some weird digital landscape that looked like it was designed by a drunk Sims player. This one, he said, pointing to a neon green blob, cost me $4,000. But it's worth at least $10,000 now. Easy. I stared at the screen, trying to look impressed. Wow, that's something. It's not just something, he said, lowering his voice like he was about to reveal a state secret. It's the future. People like you and me, we're gonna be left behind if we don't get in now. Uh-huh, I said, nodding slowly. So, what do you do with them? Like, can you sell them? He frowned, like I'd just asked if I could eat Monopoly money. It's not about selling. It's about owning. It's about being part of the movement. Oh, okay. At this point, I was desperate to change the subject, so I asked him about his hobbies. His response? Crypto is my hobby, and my job, and my passion. Cool. Cool. By the time I finished my latte, I was plotting my escape. I figured I'd give it a few more minutes, then fake a work emergency or an early yoga class or literally anything to get out of there. But Ethan wasn't done yet. You know, he said, leaning back in his chair, you seem smart. I could help you get started. It's not hard. All you need is a wallet, some Ethereum, and a little patience. Oh, I don't know, I said, laughing nervously. I'm not really a numbers person. You don't have to be, he said, waving me off. I'll set you up. I'll even give you some Bitcoin to get started. That's really generous, but... Trust me, he said, cutting me off. In 5 years, you'll thank me. We're talking Lamborghinis, private islands, total freedom. The people who don't get in now, they're gonna regret it for the rest of their lives. At this point, I couldn't take it anymore. Well, I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. This has been educational, but I really have to get going. Wait, he said, looking genuinely confused. We're just getting started. I haven't even told you about staking yet. Another time, I said, forcing a smile. Thanks for the coffee. As I walked out of the cafe, I could feel his eyes on me, probably wondering why I wasn't jumping at the chance to join his crypto empire. When I got to my car, I sat there for a few minutes, replaying the date in my head and wondering how I'd missed the red flags. The sunglasses indoors, the fist bump, the buzzwords. It was all there. I just didn't see it. When I got home, I deleted Bumble and poured myself a glass of wine. Then I Googled how to politely tell someone you're not interested in crypto, just in case he messaged me again. Spoiler, he did. The next day, I got a text from him. Hey, great meeting you. Let me know if you want me to send you some Bitcoin to get started. I blocked his number. I should have known this date was going to be a disaster the moment he suggested Olive Garden. I mean, no shade to Olive Garden. Unlimited breadsticks are a gift from the gods. But as a first date spot, it's unconventional. Still, I figured, hey, maybe he's quirky. Maybe he's one of those people who doesn't take life too seriously. That's what his profile said, after all. Down to earth, loves to laugh, and always up for an adventure. So to begin, his name was Kyle, and we matched on Tinder about a week before. He wasn't traditionally handsome, but he had that nerdy cute thing going on. Slightly crooked smile, glasses, and a mop of curly brown hair that looked like he just rolled out of bed, in a charming way, not a concerning way. His bio said he worked as a freelance graphic designer and was into hiking, craft beer, and keeping an open mind. I figured he'd be fun to talk to, which was basically all I was looking for at this point. When he suggested Olive Garden, I hesitated for a moment. But then he said, I know it's a little cheesy, but I think it'll be fun. Plus, who doesn't love breadsticks? And honestly, he had a point. Breadsticks are breadsticks. So there I was on a Wednesday night, standing in the parking lot of an Olive Garden, wondering if this was a brilliant idea or the start of a very bad decision. Spoiler, it was the latter. Kyle arrived a few minutes after me, wearing jeans, a slightly wrinkled button-down, and Converse sneakers. He was taller than I expected, which was a nice surprise, and he greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey, you made it." Like I'd just crossed the finish line of a marathon. He seemed genuinely excited to be there, and I thought, okay, maybe this won't be so bad. We got seated at a booth near the back, and as soon as we opened our menus, Kyle launched into a passionate speech about why Olive Garden is underrated. People always trash on chain restaurants, he said, waving his hand dismissively. But honestly, they don't get it. Olive Garden is a classic. It's consistent, it's affordable, and it's got that nostalgic vibe, you know? Totally, I said, nodding along. I mean, who doesn't love pasta? Exactly, he said, smiling like I'd just validated his entire worldview. Plus, the breadsticks. You really can't beat the breadsticks. I laughed, thinking, okay, he's a little eccentric, but that's not a bad thing. Maybe this will be fun. And then the conversation took a turn. So, he said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial glint in his eye. What's your take on 5G? I blinked. You mean like the cell towers? Yeah, he said, nodding eagerly. You think they're safe? I guess, I said, unsure of where this was going. I haven't really thought about it. Kyle leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms like he was about to drop some serious knowledge. Most people haven't. That's the problem. They don't want us to think about it. Who's they? I asked, genuinely confused. He glanced around the restaurant like he was checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. The government. The corporations. Big tech. They're all in on it. In on what? I asked, now deeply regretting my life choices. Mind control, he said, as if it were obvious. They're using 5G to control us. To keep us docile. That's why everyone's so addicted to their phones. It's all part of the plan. I stared at him, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. To make matters worse, the waiter showed up at that exact moment to take our order, and Kyle didn't miss a beat. Do you guys filter your water here? He asked. The waiter blinked. I think so. Good, Kyle said, nodding solemnly. Because unfiltered water is full of fluoride, and fluoride is how they keep us complacent. The waiter looked at me, clearly waiting for some kind of explanation. I just smiled awkwardly and ordered the fettuccine Alfredo. After the waiter left, Kyle launched into a full-on rant about government conspiracies, ranging from the fake moon landing to chemtrails to how birds aren't real. Yes, you read that correctly. He genuinely believed birds were government drones designed to spy on us. Have you ever seen a baby pigeon? He asked, raising an eyebrow like he'd just cracked the Da Vinci Code. I don't think so, I said, trying to keep a straight face. Exactly, he said triumphantly. That's because they don't exist. Think about it, birds are always watching, always listening. It's not a coincidence. At this point, I was seriously considering faking an emergency, but the breadsticks had just arrived, and I felt like I deserved at least one for putting up with this nonsense. So I stayed. Big mistake. By the time our food arrived, Kyle had moved on to ranting about how the Illuminati controls Hollywood. Apparently Beyoncé, Tom Hanks, and Keanu Reeves are all in on it, which is why they never age. I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, like his work or hobbies, but every question I asked seemed to lead back to some new conspiracy theory. So, what kind of design work do you do? I asked, hoping for a safe topic. Well, he said, swirling his spaghetti dramatically, I mostly do freelance stuff. Logos, websites, that kind of thing. But that's just my day job. My real passion is uncovering the truth. The truth about what? Everything, he said, his eyes gleaming. The lies we've been fed since birth. Did you know the Earth isn't actually round? I nearly choked on my Alfredo. Wait, are you a flat earther? Not flat, he said, shaking his head. Hollow. The Earth is hollow, and there's an entire advanced civilization living inside it. That's where UFOs come from. They're not aliens, they're inner-Earth beings. I had no words. None. By the time the check came, I was mentally and emotionally drained. Kyle, on the other hand, seemed to be having the time of his life. This was great, he said, grinning as he handed his card to the waiter. I feel like we really connected. Yeah, I said weakly, forcing a smile. Totally. As we walked out of the restaurant, he turned to me and said, We should do this again sometime. Maybe next time I can show you some of my research. I think you'd really get it. Maybe, I said, already planning to block his number as soon as I got home. When I finally got back to my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch and immediately texted my best friend. Just went on a date with a guy who thinks birds aren't real. Send help. Her response? At least you got breadsticks. The moral of the story? Unlimited breadsticks aren't worth enduring a 2-hour conspiracy lecture. And if someone suggests Olive Garden for a first date, maybe ask a few follow-up questions. You never know what you're walking into. I should have known this date was going to be a disaster the moment he suggested Olive Garden. I mean, no shade to Olive Garden. Unlimited breadsticks are a gift from the gods. But as a first date spot, it's unconventional. Still, I figured, hey, maybe he's quirky. Maybe he's one of those people who doesn't take life too seriously. That's what his profile said, after all. Down to earth, loves to laugh, and always up for an adventure. So to begin, his name was Kyle, and we matched on Tinder about a week before. He wasn't traditionally handsome, but he had that nerdy cute thing going on. Slightly crooked smile, glasses, and a mop of curly brown hair that looked like he just rolled out of bed, in a charming way, not a concerning way. His bio said he worked as a freelance graphic designer and was into hiking, craft beer, and keeping an open mind. I figured he'd be fun to talk to, which was basically all I was looking for at this point. When he suggested Olive Garden, I hesitated for a moment. But then he said, I know it's a little cheesy, but I think it'll be fun. Plus, who doesn't love breadsticks? And honestly, he had a point. Breadsticks are breadsticks. So there I was on a Wednesday night, standing in the parking lot of an Olive Garden, wondering if this was a brilliant idea or the start of a very bad decision. Spoiler, it was the latter. Kyle arrived a few minutes after me, wearing jeans, a slightly wrinkled button-down, and Converse sneakers. He was taller than I expected, which was a nice surprise, and he greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey, you made it." Like I'd just crossed the finish line of a marathon. He seemed genuinely excited to be there, and I thought, okay, maybe this won't be so bad. We got seated at a booth near the back, and as soon as we opened our menus, Kyle launched into a passionate speech about why Olive Garden is underrated. People always trash on chain restaurants, he said, waving his hand dismissively. But honestly, they don't get it. Olive Garden is a classic. It's consistent, it's affordable, and it's got that nostalgic vibe, you know? Totally, I said, nodding along. I mean, who doesn't love pasta? Exactly, he said, smiling like I'd just validated his entire worldview. Plus, the breadsticks. You really can't beat the breadsticks. I laughed, thinking, okay, he's a little eccentric, but that's not a bad thing. Maybe this will be fun. And then the conversation took a turn. So, he said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial glint in his eye, what's your take on 5G? I blinked. You mean like the cell towers? Yeah, he said, nodding eagerly. You think they're safe? I guess, I said, unsure of where this was going. I haven't really thought about it. Kyle leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms like he was about to drop some serious knowledge. Most people haven't. That's the problem. They don't want us to think about it. Who's they? I asked, genuinely confused. He glanced around the restaurant like he was checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. The government. The corporations. Big tech. They're all in on it. In on what? I asked, now deeply regretting my life choices. Mind control, he said, as if it were obvious. They're using 5G to control us. To keep us docile. That's why everyone's so addicted to their phones. It's all part of the plan. I stared at him, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. To make matters worse, the waiter showed up at that exact moment to take our order, and Kyle didn't miss a beat. Do you guys filter your water here? He asked. The waiter blinked. I think so. Good, Kyle said, nodding solemnly. Because unfiltered water is full of fluoride, and fluoride is how they keep us complacent. The waiter looked at me, clearly waiting for some kind of explanation. I just smiled awkwardly and ordered the fettuccine alfredo. After the waiter left, Kyle launched into a full-on rant about government conspiracies, ranging from the fake moon landing to chemtrails to how birds aren't real. Yes, you read that correctly. He genuinely believed birds were government drones designed to spy on us. Have you ever seen a baby pigeon? He asked, raising an eyebrow like he'd just cracked the Da Vinci Code. I don't think so, I said, trying to keep a straight face. Exactly, he said triumphantly. That's because they don't exist. Think about it, birds are always watching, always listening. It's not a coincidence. At this point, I was seriously considering faking an emergency, but the breadsticks had just arrived, and I felt like I deserved at least one for putting up with this nonsense. So I stayed. Big mistake. By the time our food arrived, Kyle had moved on to ranting about how the Illuminati controls Hollywood. Apparently, Beyoncé, Tom Hanks, and Keanu Reeves are all in on it, which is why they never age. I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, like his work or hobbies, but every question I asked seemed to lead back to some new conspiracy theory. So, what kind of design work do you do? I asked, hoping for a safe topic. Well, he said, swirling his spaghetti dramatically, I mostly do freelance stuff. Logos, websites, that kind of thing. But that's just my day job. My real passion is uncovering the truth. The truth about what? Everything, he said, his eyes gleaming. The lies we've been fed since birth. Did you know the Earth isn't actually round? I nearly choked on my Alfredo. Wait, are you a flat earther? Not flat, he said, shaking his head. Hollow. The Earth is hollow, and there's an entire advanced civilization living inside it. That's where UFOs come from. They're not aliens, they're inner-Earth beings. I had no words. None. By the time the check came, I was mentally and emotionally drained. Kyle, on the other hand, seemed to be having the time of his life. This was great, he said, grinning as he handed his card to the waiter. I feel like we really connected. Yeah, I said weakly, forcing a smile. Totally. As we walked out of the restaurant, he turned to me and said, we should do this again sometime. Maybe next time I can show you some of my research. I think you'd really get it. Maybe, I said, already planning to block his number as soon as I got home. When I finally got back to my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch and immediately texted my best friend. Just went on a date with a guy who thinks birds aren't real. Send help. Her response? At least you got breadsticks. The moral of the story? Unlimited breadsticks aren't worth enduring a 2-hour conspiracy lecture. And if someone suggests Olive Garden for a first date, maybe ask a few follow-up questions. You never know what you're walking into.